Hey, welcome to part 4 on our segment related to our subunit on em empirical Roman art. We've been looking at the art when Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire. We just looked at the two pieces from the Emperor Augustus Caesar. Another emperor is Vespasian. He was the emperor after the Emperor Nero, who was considered an insane and very bad ruler and politician. Nero had appropriated public land and made it private, where he built a huge, opulent palace complex on it. The palace contained an artificial lake as well as a colossal bronze nude statue of Nero. Civil war erupts after his death, and Vespasian wins and ultimately becomes the ruling emperor. So Vespasian had to restore the trust of the Roman citizens and does this by giving back the land Nero took from the people. He builds a great Colosseum, officially called the Flavian Amphitheater, but became known as the Colosseum because it referenced the colossal statue of Nero that stood on the original site. So that's why it's called the Colosseum. And this is an aerial view of it. Brutal and violent contests and games were held at the Colosseum. Sometimes the floors would be flooded and they would reenact great naval battles. 55 to 75,000 people could be seated. The structure even had a shading system called a valerian, and this was a retractable canopy that could be stretched across the structure. The valerian provided shade and air conditioning to the viewers and was operated by sailors from the Navy. Today, much has been stripped away of the Colosseum. So this is sort of what it would have looked like. This is a reconstruction drawing, and then here's sort of a diagram, and then the idea of the valerian. It is said that over 9,000 animals and 2,000 gladiators died during the first 100 games at the Colosseum. So I'm sure you've seen movies, movies about gladiators are very popular. Um, the structure was dependent on the architectural feature of the arch and barrel vault. We looked at these earlier. We were looking at the aqueduct of when we were looking at Republican art, and we saw them use the arch, the repeated arch, for the aqueduct in France. We're going to see how they really take this idea of the arch and expand it and really create, really a modern structure and something that we still reference and use today in our own stadiums. So the structure was very dependent on the architectural features of the arch and the barrel vault, also known as a tunnel vault or a wagon vault. And this is an architectural element formed by the extrusion of a single curve or pair of curves, in this case, of a pointed barrel vault along a given distance. The curves are typically circular in shape, lending a semi-cylindrical appearance to the total design. The barrel vault is the simplest form of a vault, effectively a series of arches placed side by side, one after the other. A groin vault consisted of the intersection of two barrel vaults at a 90-degree angle and allowed for multiple passageways. This created cylindrical aisles that radiated inward. Okay, so here you have a basic arch over here, and then a barrel vault is basically a bunch of arches kind of in front of each other or behind each other, and they create this sort of barrel. And then a groin vault is two barrel vaults that are intersected, and you can see here how they kind of create these sort of multiple entryways. Now these terms are very important, so you need to have these under your belt along with those other architectural terms related to the Greek temple. You're going to have a huge repertoire of architectural terms that you need to know. Okay, so now we're going to look at an elevation of the Colosseum. The Colosseum consisted of 4 stories with archways flanked by engaged columns. Remember, engaged columns are columns that are flat against the wall. The first story used the Doric or Tuscan order. So again, they're referencing their love of Greek sculpture and architecture, the Romans are. And this was the Doric order was the most plain and severe of the architectural orders. Remember, it was like a little flat sort of pancake shape for the capital. And the first story supported most of the weight of the Colosseum. The second story incorporated the Ionic order. This order was a more decorative capital with a scroll and a sleeker shaft. The second story was less supportive than the first story. The third story used the Corinthian order. We didn't really talk much about the Corinthian. We didn't really look at any temples during the Greek period that were Corinthian, that used Corinthian capitals. But it is something that they did use in their temples and that the Greeks are also incorporating. It started off more as an interior um, column that was used mostly in interiors, and then it was adapted to exterior structures as well. This is the most decorative of the 3 orders, and it uses acanthus leaves for the capital. So the third story was the most decorative and also the least supportive. So we kind of see the system where the first story uses the more plain order. It's sturdy. It's more supportive, and then as we move up, we see the capitals getting more decorative and less supportive. The fourth story was called an attic, and it also used Corinthian pilasters, an architectural element in classical architecture used to give the appearance of a supporting column and to articulate an extent of wall. But it only operated as an ornamental function. In contrast, an engaged column or buttress can support the structure of a wall and roof above. So you have these different levels, and so here's the arena, and then it also sort of shows you how different classes of society would have been seated. So we would have had senators on the first row, and knights. We would have had plebeians on the second and third, and then obviously poor women and slaves on the third and also the attic. So now, even though the Romans are using or referencing classical architectural elements, they're very innovative though in the way they expand space. The Colosseum was only built in 10 years, which is phenomenal. Vespasian had conquered Jerusalem and brought back prisoners who worked very hard around the clock to build it. So that was one of the reasons why they were able to build it. Um, um, Another innovation was this use of concrete, where they would mix tufa or volcanic rock with other materials. And so this is not constructed out of marble, it's concrete. And this really allowed for Romans to really expand to use architecture and expand spaces in very innovative ways. Eventually, the Colosseum wasn't flooded anymore, and reenacted naval battles weren't watched. Um, and so this left a series of cells and trapdoors underneath the floor. And we can kind of see that here. And this is where the gladiators and different animals were held. You can kind of see it here. The amphitheater is such a remarkable piece of planning with easy access, perfect sight lines, and effective crowd control, and stadiums today still use this efficient plan. Some 50,000 spectators could easily move through the 76 entrance doors to the 3 levels of seats. And so it's very similar, the experience, probably like it is when you go see a football game. So the Colosseum was inspired by Greek architecture, and really what it is just two Greek theaters placed back to back, and becomes a theater in the round. So this is actually, we didn't really look at a Greek theater in our last, when we were looking at Greek architecture, but it's basically a half sort of semicircle. And so what the Romans did was just kind of put these two Greek theaters together to create a stadium or theater in the round. Um, Forgot something. Okay, sorry about that. I wanted to focus more on the actual construction of the Colosseum. So, an estimated 100,000 prisoners were brought back to Rome as slaves after the Jewish War. Vespasian had a limitless workforce. In the building of the Colosseum, the slaves undertook the manual labor, such as working in the quarries at Tivoli, where all the travertine was quarried. This is a type of marble, so it did have some marble. Slaves would also have been used, and this was more for decoration purposes. Slaves would also have been used to lift and transport the heavy stones 20 miles from Tivoli to Rome. Teams of professional builders, engineers, artists, painters, and decorators undertook the skilled tasks necessary for building the Colosseum. And really, the building of the Colosseum could not have existed without the invention of concrete and the vaulted arch. Roman architecture and buildings, such as the Colosseum, were strongly influenced by two of their great inventions, concrete and the vaulted arches. Concrete was a recent invention when the Colosseum was built, and the Romans were still learning how to use it. As concrete was so new, they did not know how strong it was or how long it would last. The Romans cautiously combined concrete together with stone. So it's just a mixture of the two. And when we're looking at Republican architecture in part one, you did notice the Temple of Fortunus, and that was also a mixture of concrete or some type of concrete using tufa stone or volcanic ash. So concrete was made by mixing a strong volcanic material called um, pez, pezzolana with rubble, sand, and a mixture of lime. The Colosseum had four tiers. The ceilings of the passages and corridors which circled the arena on each tier consisted of a vaulted arch made of concrete. But the supports that rested on it were made of strong, heavy limestone. The vaulted arches made the ceiling much stronger than a flat ceiling would have allowed. Vaulted arches made of concrete added strength to the building without adding excessive weight. Without concrete and vaulted arches, the Colosseum could not have been built. So these are two innovations that I really want you to think about and remember when you're ever confronted with the Colosseum. And again, because of these two um, innovations, that's the reason why the Colosseum was another reason why it was able to be built in only 10 years. Um, and you know, and that's how you should think of the Romans. The Romans were definitely engineers and problem solvers. They used new building techniques. They incorporated standardized parts. Stairs and seats were constructed off-site. The stairs and seats were all built to the same size and were made to be interchangeable. So, I mean, that's pretty innovative. They were made in a workshop and then brought to the amphitheater to be fitted by teams experienced in this work. So, you know, these were very sophisticated engineers and builders. All right, so I'm going to stop here. In our next segment, we're going to be looking at some other Roman emperors and some of their monuments that they built. So stay tuned.